This is the Chapter 3 Stigma podcast. This podcast was created to be there for any individual who feels like they are at a low point in life and are confused, seemingly alone, and helpless in their situation. I am a recovering alcoholic, and I felt this way too, until I sat across the table from another addict who shared his story and made me realize that I was not alone in my struggles. My life was saved by this realization, and I hope to help anyone struggling by sharing my story to show you that you are not alone and that life can contain unbelievable riches and meaning. Welcome. I am glad you are here. Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Chapter 3 Stigma podcast. I'm very excited to bring you a conversation today with a new friend of mine by the name of Mike Collins. So we'll get into it in the conversation, but Mike does have a recovery story of his own, but then we do dive into basically what his life journey has turned into and his new mission and focus has been since he entered into recovery from alcohol and other substances well over 3 decades ago. So part of his journey, and just a bit of a lead in, is Mike has found a new calling for himself as the sugar-free man for his work, in particular in the area of food addiction, primarily focused on addiction stemming from ultra-processed sugars. Now, this is, in all honesty, a conversation that I never anticipated having when I first sat down and thought about the creation of Chapter 3 Stigma. But as you will see, if you listen to the conversation here, there are incredible ties across addiction classes, regardless of what your substance is that you go to. And in the world of recovery, specifically from more traditional, like what's seen as hard drugs and alcohol, there is a very, very real risk of replacing one addictive behavior or substance with another one. And if that is not addressed, and people do this because they do not focus in on the really foundational and underlying work of that is required to do honest assessments and house cleaning to truly free yourself of your addictive obsessions and behaviors. So Mike and I will cover this quite extensively and in great detail in the podcast episode. A little bit more on Mike before getting to the conversation. Mike runs something called the Quit Sugar Summit, which does have a session kicking off on January 6th of 2025. You are able to find out more at quitsugarsummit.com or by following the links that I will put in the show notes. In addition to founding and running the Quit Sugar Summit, Mike has also served as the chairman of the board for the Food Addiction Institute, and he is the author of a top-selling book on the topic called The Last Resort Sugar Detox Guide. Mike is very serious about going after the root cause of addictive behaviors. And because of that, this was such an insightful and inspiring conversation. With that, here's Mike.
So the journey probably begins another generation back. My grandmother died when my mother was only 8 years old. And it was traumatic, obviously, for her. She was the youngest, and most of the other kids had left the house. So my grandfather and her had to move in with my great aunt, and they lived in a country rural area, and they owned the country store across the street. And they made a deal with my grandfather with his cousin Jim that anytime my mom walked into that store, she could have any kind of candy she wanted and just put it on his tab. Now, while that was a wonderful thing to do for a young child, it created the problem that will be most of the message that I'm about to deliver here is that my mother believed that sugar was love. And that's how I grew up. I grew up covered up in sugar, covered up in we had unfettered access to the sugar bowl. We could put as much sugar on our cornflakes or Cheerios as we wanted. We were scraping off half an inch with the milk at the bottom. And it was just wild. I mean, my mother loved her candy, so we had a stash all the time. We knew where her stash was, and we were basically using buddies. She was baking cookies all the time and buying candy and whatever. And the one thing I didn't know then, and I think most people in the society don't know, which is the core of our message, is that that was changing my state, how I felt. I was numbing a little bit with that substance. It's where the term emotional eating comes from, or comfort food comes from, but it actually is a biological, physiological perform or a mechanism that when you get that, when you ingest, you get a little bit of dopamine. And when I say dopamine, Kyle, I mean dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, GABA, oxytocin, adrenal glands, endorphins, cannabinoid receptors, all of your brain and body reward chemicals. I just use the word dopamine as a catch-all because most people nowadays know what it is. But anyway, fast forward, about 14 years old or 15, I ran into beer. Now, beer I knew changed my state because I was kind of shy and I could drink behind the high school and talk to the girls, at the dance and whatever. So I realized that. I understood it. And I think a lot of people do, like they have a glass of wine on an evening or a beer on a Friday because they had a rough week. They understand as adults what they're doing. The part that's missing, and it was just the same with me, fast forward to 28, the party, we can talk about as much as you want. I'm kind of an open book about it, but I got sober at 28, right? And I went right back to sugar. Basically, it was what all folks do is they go, they don't do it consciously, but hey, it's in the big book a couple of times. And, that sugar is a good substitute, if you will, because they didn't, the science wasn't there. And, when the big book was written, but it does actually soothe you, self-soothe you a little bit. And that is really what's happening with sugar. It's not the sweet taste. I do believe that the universe or God, whatever your belief system is, created this perfect storm and this, it was a cruel joke that sugar tasted sweet, right? Now it has a function in nature. Once or twice a year, we were supposed to get sweetness when the berries or whatever the fruit was ripe, or if you got some honey, but that was it, once or twice a year. And remember that part because the fructose molecule is the important molecule. Anyway, keep going. Fast forward. I grew up. I had a regular life, regular career, businesses and stuff. But I raised two sugar-free kids. Okay, well, I met my ex-wife in recovery, and we had a couple of kids, and they were twins. And we raised them with no sugar, no flour, no caffeine in the womb. As soon as she got pregnant, she stopped all of those things. And until they were 6 years old, they never had any sugar. Okay. And, it was a very unusual childhood, to say the least. And again, I can tell you anything about that story. This introduction usually brings up more questions than it answers. But anyway, the kid said, you should write a book, Dad, because obviously their childhood was very different. And they had to explain it to their friends and their schoolmates and the whole thing.
And,
so,
sorry to interject. How old are they now?
They're 35 years old.
Okay.
Married with children of their, one of them has a child of their own. And if I told you their story, you'd think I was lying or bragging, but I do believe that their brain developed better. That first 1,000 days, they even have nonprofits now. The brain development is so amazing. But anyway, so I wrote the book in 2018. I was getting near semi-retirement. I was kind of working a little bit, but I wanted to do this. I bought sugaraddiction.com in 2009 and put up a nice website and gave out good information, but most people didn't do much with it. It wasn't until about like 2018 after the book, I started to coach people. We started to form groups. I always say I built my company backwards. I always knew that we needed support groups. So
Hmm.
today, well, let me go through the whole story. Is that when the pandemic hit, I was kind of geared up, right? I had some online support meetings. I was coaching people. I had a couple coaches, and all hell broke loose. Obviously, you remember they bought
Hmm.
out all the sugar, they bought out all the flour, they bought out all the candy, they bought out everything, and it was just, you know, bedlam. And people finally discovered Zoom. They had to have Zoom to visit their family, to even visit sick people in the hospital. They had to Zoom. So this combination caused our business to explode. And today we have, four or five meetings, support meetings, the Zoom support meetings a day, and we have, coaching. We're certified, just got certified by the National Board of Health and Wellness Coaches. So it's grown into quite an enterprise. And it's really, to be honest, the reason I'm on Recovery Podcast is because in my first 20 years, I helped recovering alcoholics and drug addicts get sober.
Hmm.
And I
Yep.
started in late stage food addiction. I actually was the chairman of the board of the Food Addiction Institute during the pandemic too. But I never realized that it's identical, maybe
Okay.
worse. It's a harder recovery. Because I'm open about my story, I've had hundreds, probably 500 recovering people, 5 year, 10 year, 20 years sober, and they still can't put down the sugar. And
Hmm.
to a man, to a woman, every one of them says the same thing, that it was harder to quit sugar when they finally got off it. So that's the short version. That kind of brings you up to speed. That's how during the pandemic, this name, the Sugar Free Man, stuck. And so I started using it, and that's, how I became the Sugar Free Man.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah, one of the things that surprised me in my own journey, and kind of as I started getting into recovery literature and programs, specifically with AA, is the fact that they recognized that there was something there with sugar in particular.
Yep.
Um, I think in terms of the big book, it's like mentioned twice. And in one specific instance, it's basically like have a bunch of sugar on hand for that time period shortly after stepping away from alcohol. But then it's not it's not really brought back up with regards to like, hey, this shouldn't become your next crutch. I think the same thing could be said with regards to like caffeine and nicotine. One thing about stepping into rehab is you look around and it's like they cut off us from caffeinated coffee at 1 p.m. And then they let people smoke all day long, right? So it's like there's clear examples of like, yes, we understand people are going to go towards different substances, and sugar was a big one. I had a roommate in rehab who every single night got up at 3 a.m. He walked himself to the dining space. He got 2 Rice Krispie bars, ate them, and then came back and went to bed. His body was just like, it was such a consistent alarm for him to rise and go and seek sugar. And
Yeah, sure.
it's just a really intense pull. And one other item, just with regards to my own journey, I've had, I took 12 years to accept myself as an alcoholic. And I do want to get back to that part of your story and your journey here shortly. But the funny part about those 12 years was I had a lot of therapists, counselors that I went to see, and I always skirted around the idea of being an alcoholic. And there was only one therapist that ever called me an alcoholic, and it was after I told her about intense sugar cravings that I was experiencing in the weeks after giving up alcohol. She kind of flippantly said, like, oh yeah, that's pretty common for alcoholics. And that stung me in the moment, and that cut deep. And so much so that I stopped going to see her. But it was from that behavior with sugar that she was able to like highlight and call out that this is very common for people entering into recovery to actually step themselves into something else. And what you'll commonly hear is like, I'll pick on myself. Like if I go to have like a bowl of ice cream, I can always justify it and think it's not alcohol. It's not getting me drunk. It's not leading me to destroy my life the way that I had destroyed it. But I think if you string enough of those like excuses and reasons together, like you will really quickly find yourself in a very bad state.
No, it's true. It's it is in the big book twice, and I just don't think the science was there back then. They just didn't know.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. Well, and also I'm kind of spitballing here. It's like, I don't think they had the level of intensity with some of the processing methods that we can just like really pack in a significant like sugar load and hit to our systems, the way they did back then, in the 1930s when the book was written. Like chocolate was probably a much higher percentage of actual cacao than, processed and refined sugar. So kind of stepping back to that time period when you're 28 and found yourself entering into recovery. Was there a specific event or moment that like really stands out to you as like your, what some people call like low point, or other people refer to as like your jumping off point? Like what was the moment when you decided that you needed to do something different in your life?
Yeah, it was kind of cumulative. It was when I was 19 years old, I smashed a car up, almost killed my friend, got arrested for DWI. And I was kind of regularly wet in the bed. But my solution at 19 was to stop driving. I didn't stop drinking.
Yep.
And so at 23, I stopped drinking, but I never stopped doing drugs, cocaine, marijuana, and stuff. And because I didn't drink, and because I bartended my way through college, when I got out of college and ended up in Florida, I got promoted very rapidly and ran, no exaggeration, the largest nightclubs in the state of Florida and I kept getting promoted, but I was still doing drugs, but I wasn't drinking because they thought that was wonderful. Most of their bar managers were drinkers.
Sure.
And so,
Yeah.
It was really cocaine that got me. My heart was hurting all day, every day. And when I first went to my first meeting at a treatment center, I stopped doing coke that day, but I couldn't stop smoking pot. So that was about 3 months later. I'd go to meetings, get high, go to meetings, get high. So it was a progression, kind of a gradual progression of how I stepped out of it all. Like during the time I was 23 to 28, I probably drank maybe 4 or 5 times.
Okay.
And then, like I said, the coke, because I was in a position where the drug dealers needed me more than I needed them, I got a lot of free product, if you will. So the cocaine became a problem. But I think at the end of the day, I started smoking pot when I was 18. It really became my drug of choice after, and it took me a long time after I started going to meetings. Well, not a long time, 3 months before I finally stopped everything. So yeah, it'll be 40 years in a couple of weeks a couple of weeks here.
That's
So
incredible.
a long time, I've been sober a lot longer than I was drinking.
Yeah. Does it feel like a different life to you at this point?
Definitely a different life.
Okay. Yeah.
Definitely a different life, yeah.
Yeah, I've wondered that. I'm early on my journey, but I do have these moments where I reflect back, and humans have a tendency to kind of in a weird way forget the suffering and the pain that they went through, and so there's this weird experience reflecting back on at least my time when I was really struggling with alcohol, in part because I'm so committed and like so convinced that if I would ever introduce it again, like alcohol to me is a road to death. But to just look back and see such different thought patterns and like a different lens and understanding of the world and my experiences and how they led to and played into those like thought patterns and view of the world. It just does already feel like a totally different life experience. And so with your story, I kind of want to again step back a little bit. And you had mentioned at the very front end, and please correct me if I get your wording wrong, but your mother expressed love via sugar.
Yeah.
Was that something in the moment, like when you were a child, that was talked about and understood, or was that something that you started understanding and connecting with upon reflection?
Yeah, no, it was all reflection. And I think that's the problem in the world, the diet world, the obesity world, the addiction world. To be honest, I believe it's the gateway drug. It's the original drug. No one understands this. First of all, they don't understand the power of the psychoactive nature, the ability to tamp down emotions, difficult emotions with sugar. That's where, like I said, the comfort food comes from, the idea of emotional eating, which is a misnomer of sorts. It's really addiction. They don't understand that, people in the emotional eating community believe that you can eat sugar in moderation, but it's just not true for an addict. Now, there are some people that can do that, but it's for an addict, you can't really do that. And so, this misinterpretation of exactly what sugar is doing, a lot of people think it's a sweet taste on the tongue that they're craving, or a crunchy or a smooth or whatever. But in reality, when you back it all the way out and you start to see the science and you slide people into MRIs, you start to understand that the brain lights up exactly like it does when you do drugs or alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the dose that makes the poison. And, we take a little alcohol, we take a little heroin, whatever. We are pounding as a culture and a world, a planet, just average, 20 plus teaspoons a day. That's somebody that doesn't have a big problem. So 30, 40, 50 sometimes teaspoons of sugar a day are going through a system that never gets a break from it. And it is affecting people's brains and their emotional life. It's numbing their brain. It's shrinking their brain. And this part is where the science is very clear. In the last 3 to 5 years, it's exploded. I do these quit sugar summits where I have interviewed 400 of the world's leading experts. And to a man, all of them say the same thing, that, sugar is a deadly neurotoxin. But it's in such small doses and it doesn't get you high. I think when all the diagnostic tools are available 50 years from now, we'll understand that sugar is such a good soothing agent. And that's the reason it got us into this problem, this obesity and type 2 diabetes and metabolic syndrome problem across the world, is that people do not understand that it is not an eat less and exercise more problem. It is an emotional codependency drug and alcohol recovery program for some people, about a third of the population, to walk out of this and, just saying I'll quit or trying it without support is not possible even sometimes. Yeah.
And so when you have individuals approach you,
Yeah.
where they're expressing like, I feel like I need help, I think there's a problem, what do you see as the like usual motivations for them taking that step? And then subsequently, do you feel like they are generally assuming that you're going to deliver or give some like tactics for avoiding or moderation? And so does some of this, like some of the more like step type work, emotional aspects of it, does that catch them off guard? And like, how do they progress through that if it doesn't align with their expectations that they had coming into it?
Yeah, no, you're really discussing the bane of my existence, which is this. I'm fighting against the diet industry. 85%
Yes,
of
right.
people come to me for weight loss, right? 20% of those people, if I actually end up talking to them on the phone for coaching, are crying. They've never
Yeah.
heard this before. So the principal reason people come is originally weight loss and diabetes diagnosis, diabetes 2 diagnosis. But what happens is the messaging that I have to deliver, the way that I have to ease people into this process has been the thing that I've had to worry about, figure out, and still am figuring out, because I have a 30-day challenge that I do. It's all recorded. I've redone it 4 times because we keep learning more. But on the on the last day or the last day, I say, I tricked you. This is a recovery program, not a weight or diet program.
Yeah.
But by then they know, because they've gone to meetings or hearing other people talk and whatever. But it's just people don't want to be an addict. They don't want to be addicted to anything. They
Yep.
think of a guy with a brown paper bag under a bridge, but the
Yes.
and I agree. Look, from the government websites and everything, the word addict, the word addiction, they've all been scrubbed. It's now substance use disorder or people with substance use disorder. It's not; those terms are pejorative. They're like the N word. They're stigmatizing. It's just not a good word. Those are not words you'd use these days for people in the know. But I mean, people still use them. Hell, my freaking site is named sugaraddiction.com. I have to change.
Right.
It's because, but I do believe in that construct in a big way. I think it's important, but it's still the same thing. And right now, 90% of the population or 95% of the population understands what addiction is. They just don't want to be one.
Right.
They don't
Right.
want to be an addict, but they have to recover. And most of the people that come to us, I mean, hell, the name of my book is The Last Resort Sugar Detox. We're the last house on the block. They've tried everything else, okay? They cannot do this. They're usually women. Why, I don't know, but we'll figure that one out later. But, they're women between 40 and 80 who have kind of narrowed it down that their Achilles heel through all their dieting, through their whole life, the problem has been sugar. They can't stop the sugar. They can do all the rest of the diet, but they can't do the sugar. And so they're open a little bit. They're open. They've got a type 2 diabetes diagnosis. They're extra 50 pounds on them. And so they say, let me listen to this guy for a minute. And then if they accept it, and this is what I talk about the entire arc of a podcast. You need to have enough time to explain the exact question that you just asked. They can't, even recovering people, 5-10 years sober, they can't figure it out, and they're addiction savvy. So you've got to have this time period with them when they're trying to get their weight off or they're trying to get their health better, so that you can explain how this actually works. And then some get it, some don't, and that's what you got to live with. But yeah, so it's not that it's complicated, but it is not common knowledge yet. It's coming. So, it's not common knowledge.
Yeah, if I'm hearing you right, you're kind of taking the initial motivations of weight loss, concerns with type 2 diabetes, and allowing that to really carry and drive the momentum within that first 30-day window, while maybe slowly injecting the sort of recovery process or recovery mindset into that 30 days. What for someone interested or involved in your program, what occurs beyond 30 days? Do you have continued education and programs? I know you mentioned your summit, but what does that look like for somebody?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, because everybody knows the numbers. Like 95% of all people who lose any amount of weight gain it all back in the first year, and they add some.
Yes,
It's like a cultural phenomenon. No one really understands it. But if you look at the lens that we're just now describing, it's easy to explain. And that is, say it's the first of the year, you want to, do your resolution, you want to lose your weight, whatever, and everything's okay. Finances, the wife, the kids, the job, everything's okay. But then, you lose 20 or 30 pounds, you kind of muscle it, you don't get any real recovery, you're doing it by yourself. You end up, at your sister's wedding, and all of a sudden, you don't think to yourself, like, I need that beer on a Friday because it's been a rough week. You just say, I've lost 20 pounds. I think I deserve a piece of cake.
Yep.
And then they're off to the races. And so
Yeah.
the answer to your question is yes, we have what we call no sugar lifestyle. And that is after the detox, it's another program. I actually facilitate 2 of those meetings every week. And we've got one in a few hours here. And it's like, what happens is these are folks who have got 2 months to 3 or 4 or 5 years, and we don't talk much about food or weight
Mhm.
or diet. We talk about the things that you talk about in recovery. It's basically kind of a Codependence Anonymous meeting. It's
Mhm.
what's bugging you, like your husband or your job or your kids, and what would you, if you don't have an outlet, a way to talk it through, that you would be at risk of going to use sugar again and using this substance. And
Mhm.
so another, like, way, once they've got through the detox and they're still okay, these guys aren't crazy and they seem to be smiling all the time and they seem to be losing weight and putting type 2 in remission, maybe I'll stay with it a little longer.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll, like, see what the maintenance program is like.
Mhm.
And that's really where the success happens. That's where the magic happens, where you can get a year, whatever long, whatever, because abstinence in this society is not hard. It's not, but you have to say no, and you have to set
Mhm.
boundaries, and you have to stick up for yourself. And there's
Mhm.
a little change that has to happen in your family and in restaurants and whatever. So it takes some, there's nuances to it, and there's some tips and tricks that we can teach them, but mostly it's the thing that they've probably never done, which is they're able to process their emotional life, the one that they've outsourced to sugar since they were a child, with other human beings who are doing the same thing. And that's
Mhm.
pretty much the core of it. It's not rocket science, but it's not easy, or it's simple, but it's not easy because you have to
Mhm.
be vulnerable. You have to tell people what you're actually feeling and thinking. So
Mhm.
it takes about the arc of a podcast for someone to, if they were accepting, and you talk about a bottom or a place where, a turning point in their life, if they're at that turning point and this conversation makes sense to them as something they've never looked at before, then maybe they can change their behavior.
Mhm. And you've brought something up, a term up a couple times that I actually have, I would say, only lightly covered here on this podcast, but I've really never heard it until I entered into addiction recovery. But I think understanding it and reflecting on your own life and your own identity is really imperative in the healing process and the ability to deal with your emotions. Do you mind discussing kind of like your definition or perception or how you explain the concept of codependency?
That's great. No one's ever asked me that on a podcast, I think. So a lot of people believe that codependency is a relationship you have with others, and it is to an extent. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
it transcends, or it does traverse into that area of your life. But for the most part, it's the relationship you have with yourself, your self-talk, your ability to set boundaries and stick up for yourself, and follow through on things, and to blunt, or not necessarily blunt, but to reduce that negative self-talk that I'm a loser, I'm never going to lose weight, I'm never going to, all that kind of
Mm-hmm.
chatter that goes on in your mind. Same with alcoholics, they're like, I'm a drunk and blah, blah, blah. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I always tell this thing, I do this graph, I don't know if I could do it on this thing, but when I first got sober, this hand over here was 90% bad, like self-demeaning, self-deprecating talk to my self-talk. But over the 30 or 40 years, it's gone and completely switched. And so now it's only like 10% of the day where I'm beating myself up or saying nasty things to myself. And I think it's that switch in self talk, which is a practice of gratitude and self-examination and meditation and prayer and different things that help you change that relationship you have with yourself and your self-talk, right?
Hmm.
Again, codependency, when it's practiced or when it manifests itself in relationships where you're too giving, you're you're giving too much of yourself and you're losing yourself. So you're helping
Yeah.
others, but you're losing yourself. That's what people think about it, and it's true.
Yep.
That is the case. But the reason that's happening is simply because you are not solid in yourself. Your own worth and your own
Yeah.
feelings.
Well, and on that note, because I've kind of viewed codependency as sort of a either a loss of or blurring of your unique identity.
Right.
And so like in that vein, the self-talk that leads to highly codependent relationships in my mind are things like, well, I don't deserve this. I don't deserve whatever. I don't deserve happiness. I don't deserve to be in shape, to feel healthy, and on and on. And circling this one back to the example that you gave of like maybe someone has good progress, they lose 20 to 30 pounds, but they're just kind of like gutting it out. And then they go to a sister's wedding and they let loose. I think the really critical measure of like, do you get it? Do you have the long-term ability to sustain it is what are the thoughts running through your head the next day? Like, are you in the mindset where you're like, screw it. I've thrown it all out the window. I screwed up yesterday. I'm not worthy of it. Like, is that the thought pattern that you fall into?
Absolutely. That's, people say that I call it healing, but you get yourself 90 days, 30, 60, 90 days, and you've healed up a little. You're physically healed up, mentally healed up a little bit, emotionally. And when you ingest sugar, just like when you ingest alcohol, that next day, it's a combination of actual physical blue because you've
Yeah.
blasted like a week's worth of dopamine in like
Right.
2 hours, the sugar or the alcohol. And so the next day you're like kind of
Yeah.
depleted. And plus then you get that self-talk back because the self-talk comes out when you're depleted. It doesn't come
Yes.
out when all the dopamine's firing and you're exercised and you're eating clean and it it's I there's a topic that I don't know if you're ever familiar with this, and I've been working on this a little bit. Tony Robbins stuff is based on neurolinguistic programming, which is
Okay.
anchoring your state, right? You can anchor it by doing a fist, or you can anchor positive things, whatever. But think about the internal anchors that we create,
Hmm.
meaning we're ingesting something, we're blasting dopamine. Our internal anchors to our old life, our internal anchors to that old life are this depressed, not feeling good, and then it's a downward spiral. As
Hmm.
opposed to we're eating clean, we're exercising, we're got a good family relationships. It begins a spiral upward. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And a positive spiral. And so it's important that you can these practices are consistent, whether it's gratitude or healthy eating or exercise or whatever.
Yeah.
Setting
And
boundaries.
yeah, drawing this to my journey with alcoholism, I would have long stints of sobriety where I would go 6+ months. I would have a consequence. Something would happen to in life, and I would be motivated. I would be motivated to change. I'd be motivated to reset things. I wanted to prove to others and to myself that I was not an alcoholic. So I was gonna white knuckle it, grin and bear it, and just not drink. When I found a reason and an excuse to bring alcohol back into my life because I was doing no other work outside of just avoiding something, I reverted almost immediately. It was scary how quickly I went back to that same low point, that and depressive state that I was in
Yeah.
prior to abstaining. And I think that's the key difference between, just white knuckling and staying away from something, and actually working, on the steps, if you're in AA, or through some other distinct and like meaningful program to rewire the thought patterns and to figure out how to address these situations where emotions come up, and those emotions can lead to those thoughts. And what are you doing? Are you spiraling after you ate the cake, or are you picking yourself up and going, boy, I don't feel good. I'm gonna work. I'm just gonna step back into where I was the day before yesterday, and just keep on upwards. I think that's a huge difference, and it's been, because I got a good amount of time being sober, just white knuckling it, and it never worked.
Never works. It's the same as sugar. It really is. I mean, people can substitute exercise, and exercise helps, but we use exercise for the mental wellness part, for the grooving new neural pathways in your brain, shut down the old neural pathways, right? We don't use it for calorie burning or whatever. So there's a lot of practices that you can incorporate that make you feel a little bit better, for sure.
And one question that I have that is really quite specific to sugar as a substance is with regards to its connection with and expression of love. How I imagine it's a huge struggle for many people. And like, I say that because I'm reflecting right now and thinking about its impact on my life. Like, how do you help people through, or how have you seen people navigate well, kind of extracting the love, caring, and affection that they get from, specific types of treats, desserts, like grandma's recipe, and being able to kind of separate themselves from, like, hey, you can still show your love and feel the affection from your grandmother without, going to this recipe or substance.
Yeah, no, that's it is a little bit of a conundrum in that it's just cultural. I'm not a big fan of the genetic theory of alcoholism or even sugar addiction. I believe it's a familial pattern. It's something you learned, how you learned, and how you were loved, and how you were raised, and what the family did in circumstances like you're describing, where they got together or they wanted to, share a celebration or whatever, and those are hard to break because they're true ties to the underlying emotion or thought was in the gift giving, or the being the supplier of the said substance, is to that they really wanted to express love, but love was hard. They saying the words was hard, and going through the difficult times was hard, meaning they couldn't have the hard conversations, they couldn't say no, they couldn't tell someone that they were upset with them, whatever. And so it's this type of separating the two apart, cleaving them apart to see which is which, right? And abstinence will do that for you, because you're left bare and you don't have other ways to express your love, or set your boundaries, or argue fairly. Everything's like raw. People talk about it like that too, like it's a raw emotions, and you gotta learn new ways to cope, whether it's like all the different methods of self-soothing. But it's not easy. I'll put it that way. It's not impossible, but it just takes guidance. It takes people that have traveled before you that you can ask about this. And because you're not going to get it from the people at the same level, or the people that you were in your family of origin, or your friend group, or your work group. They're just not going to understand the things you're even talking about, literally. Their answer will be, have a cookie and we'll talk about it tomorrow. You know what I mean? That's their answer. And because that's what their family did, but tomorrow never comes because there's always cookies tomorrow. So yeah, it's an awareness builder. It's a way to, it has to be a way that people start to understand how they accidentally, now none not their fault, either
Hmm.
their fault or their parents' fault, that they fell into this culture that since slavery, has integrated sugar into everything from birth to death and every celebration in between.
Hmm.
And now since the 80s, sugar in the grocery stores, where 85% of the food has sugar in the grocery. So very few people are immune to this light level of um, what's the right word? Anesthesia, if you will, to their
Hmm.
emotions. Okay. There's very few people, like I said, that are immune to that. And they don't realize it consciously.
Right.
It's when it's taken away that it pops up and you got to deal with it.
Right. And there's incredible benefit in both addiction recovery or like alcoholic recovery as well as sugar recovery in looking into and addressing that emotional aspect. Like, I think that having gone through it is enough of a resounding why for really anyone to pursue that type of work. One thing that I want to touch on, at least briefly before we have to wrap up here, you had mentioned in the last 3 to 5 years, like there's really an upswell in our understanding of the physical ramifications and impacts to ourselves with regards to sugar intake. What in your mind in the last 3 to 5 years is like the greatest finding or most motivating finding for someone to really reflect back, look at their own lives to see like what could be bettered should they pursue, reduction in sugar or really looking at their intake?
Yeah, no, that's another good question. Look, one of the things, this is so interesting. So we've had hundreds of 100-pound weight loss. We've had hundreds of
Mm.
type 2 diabetes remissions, right? And these are wonderful things. This is what people came for. But when we do surveys, even those folks answer this same question that you're asking inadvertently. They didn't realize it. I didn't realize it when I started, and they are more shocked than I am. And the answer is, the number one answer is not that they lost 100 pounds. It's not that they put type 2 in remission. It's that their brain came back online. They were
Wow. Yeah.
focusing better. They were remembering better. Their
Hmm.
anxiety was lessened, right? And everything we've been talking about in this episode is that they started to realize that they were managing their emotions with sugar, that when they wrote it all out and they lived it again, they realized that they were not going to the vending machine at 4 o'clock because they were going there because they hated their boss and hated their job, or
Yeah.
whatever. They were not, it was not the afternoon slump or whatever they were calling it before they
Hmm.
started to like separate their use and the actual substance itself. So the answer to your question is that, and this is, the science is very clear on this, and it's exploding, that sugar and mental health, metabolic syndrome and mental health, ultra processed carbohydrates and mental health are complete antithesis of one another. Like, when people let go of these products, their mental health gets better. I mean, I'm talking bipolar, on meds. I got a coach. Was 4 years sober when she showed up, but she was on bipolar meds, and now she was studied with Georgia Ede from Harvard, and she's helping other people get off bipolar meds. And bipolar and depression medication, when you're abstinent sugar, is too much. It makes you woozy. It makes you weird. Like, you
Hmm.
can't really do both. And in my opinion, it's like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? I believe the sugar came first, and that the depression meds were and are antidotes to this. And this is a scientific fact. the thinning out, it's called down regulating your dopamine receptors. You have less of them. They're, and so you're given Prozac or you're given some kind of depression med because you keep beating the hell out of them. So you're eating the sugar and you're eating the Prozac, you're eating the sugar, back and forth, back and forth. When if you just let go of the sugar, you can let go of both of them and you feel better. So
Yeah.
it's the mental and emotional is the number one benefit. Genuinely.
Yeah, that's incredible to hear. And I mean, again, the parallels are impossible to ignore and shouldn't be ignored. I think one of the greatest things that I've been given back after entering into recovery is exactly that point. Not only mental clarity, like there are sometimes that I'm pulling information out of my head or saying something that catches me off guard that I was able to like string those ideas or thoughts together. Yeah. It's like, whoa, where did that come from? That is not
absolutely
my usual mode of operation. And then on the anxiety front, and in my case, it was anxiety that was so bad that I couldn't sleep at night. In the last 18 months, I can honestly tell you, I've had 2 bad nights of sleep. I've had 2 instances where when I laid my head on my pillow that I struggled to fall asleep. And I was emotionally very disrupted on both of those nights. And I did have that anxiety well back up and come back into me. But being able to step away from those items as I entered into recovery were like the greatest. I thought I was just going to stay sober. And, I never knew that I would get those kind of things in return. And so just kind of in closing, one thing I'm very curious about, being involved in the recovery space and also with regards to substances like alcohol and other drugs, as well as sugar, which I guess like just call it a drug. Where do you feel like our culture is in terms of like our perception of sugar as like, hey, there's a lot of second and third order impacts that like we didn't really consider as we started processing these things and refining them down and packing them into all of our cereals, all of our foods. Like, this might seem random, but like I have heard more about Canadian Fruit Loops in the last couple months than I ever thought I would have in my life. Do you feel like there's a trend in the direction that you have been pushing for, throughout your time in this area of work that is like going the right way? Like, should we be optimistic about where we're headed?
God, I hope so. That's what we're all fighting for. And, as we record this, it's right after the election and the promise of, and leaving politics completely aside, because this is, literally 2 parties combined that are attacking this. And the Casey and Callie Means and RFK and the upset that they're about to throw, the curveball they're about to throw the American health system, maybe, just maybe, that level of disruption will show us what happened in the cigarette world is very easy to explain. There was a $1 trillion advertising campaign via the litigation against the states, or the states against the companies, right? And so every day for over a decade, we would see news reports of how bad cigarettes were. And it took the population from adult population of 43% down to less than 14% today, smoking cigarettes. Now, this is what we want to happen. Now, I believe in 2 things. For the answer to your question is policy down, and hopefully this government stuff will help. We don't know. Nobody knows. And then also grassroots up, which is kind of what we do in the summits and sugar addiction stuff. This is what we're attempting. And I've always erred on the side of the grassroots part. I think it's, if a trend can start, or somebody, a leader emerges who's charismatic, that can start to people can start to translate these things into simple things. And, really we're fighting against a cultural tsunami where you can give this stuff to a child and nobody's going to be upset with you. It's
Hmm.
like, it's not, and it's just like a gap in the science. The science is very clear that children should not have this substance. Definitely not between 0 and 3 or 4,
Yep.
while they're developing. But it's not common knowledge yet, and it's happening. But just how fast? When will the tipping point be? I don't know. I wish I
Hmm.
did, but I want to be part of it. I am part of it, and I want to see the. Right now, there's a work group that I've interviewed. There's 40 of them, and I've interviewed over 30 of them, who are working on getting sugar addiction named into the ICD-10, which is the World Health. There's also a work group here in the United States trying to get it named into the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual.
Hmm.
My job is to spread information about that, right? Help them. I'm not on the work group, but I've interviewed the chairman of that work group on the summit. So we're just trying to spread that information out. And look, I never signed up, Kyle, to be the anti-sugar guy. I don't
Right.
want
Yep.
to everybody's high. I don't want to like whatever. But I can't. What's the saying? Bad things happen when good men do nothing or whatever. It's like I can't watch anymore. I can't watch poor children be obese anymore
Yep.
because they don't buy the stuff.
Yep.
Like they are not nourishing themselves. They are being given it, and they're being given it because their parents don't know. It's not that they're
Hmm.
mean or wanting to hurt them. They want it. They want them to smile when they give them candy. They smile, and they're happy. But they don't realize the longer term ramifications of weight and health and stuff.
Hmm.
So the answer to your question is like I'm very optimistic, and I'm not political at all. And this is not a political statement. I'm optimistic about the destruction, the upset, the disruption that this new administration will give, because this is a few of their standing uh, gripes about the food industry, that
Hmm.
they are, 75%, 80% of the food in the grocery store has sugar in it for no damn good reason. It just
Hmm.
shouldn't be there. It's just used because people know they'll eat more of it if they feel better when they eat it, when they do. So anyway, it's complicated, but I think it'll happen faster than the cigarettes did, which took
Hmm.
decades. I'm hoping because we have the internet, which we can get the information out quicker.
Right.
So
Right.
I think that's where
No,
we.
I love that response, and the type of work that you do, I fully agree that I think giving people agency, showing them what's possible, building the community that motivates and instructs and guides is so imperative in these types of situations. And I agree. I think it's so critical for us to have this type of group that exists and the type of work that you've put together. So if people are interested in learning more, or want to investigate your work further, where would you point them to?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to get you a link, but the Quit Sugar Summit is on January 6th, depending on when this airs. Um, and sugaraddiction.com is always there. You can always download my free Amazon book there. We brought it home and gave it away for free now. Um, you can go to Amazon and get a hard copy, and you can also download it from Amazon for free. But the book is The Last Resort Sugar Detox. But sugaraddiction.com or the quitsugarsummit.com. And I'm Sugar Free Man on all social media and sugar addiction and stuff. Just Google my name. You'll find me. But yeah,
Excellent.
any of those places.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike. And we'll be sure. I say we. It's me. It's a one man operation here. I'll be sure to drop the all the links in the show notes. I very much appreciate this conversation. As the father of a 3-year-old, I have seen the shocking response to a denial of sugar, and it's obvious. It's obvious that there's something there that is tapping into a system within the child that is like, it feels like something has been disrupted when
Yeah.
you see a child have a meltdown over not being able to get a sucker. And so I appreciate the work that you're doing. I think it's so incredibly important. And again, just the ties and how it showcases like the recovery journey and the recovery process. It's like the substances can differ, but in such a large part, the solution is nearly the same. And so thank you very much for sharing your story, for sharing your work, and for the time here today on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
If you enjoyed this podcast, share it with others or give us a rating on your channel of choice. My hope is that my story can help others in their struggles with addiction or any other aspects of life that they feel could be bettered. You can follow us on social media at Chapter 3 Stigma on Instagram and YouTube. I cannot solve your problems for you, but I can listen. If you want to reach out with a message through one of those channels, I will respond and let you know that you are not alone. All the best, you are loved, and life is worth every struggle and bit of suffering you have to endure. Until next time, all the best.